Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. I'm Eric, 38, and up until a few months ago I thought I had the perfect life. My wife Lisa and I were that couple everyone envied. You know the type, smiling in all the pictures, always hosting dinner parties, seemingly in sync with each other. We had been married for over 10 years and I truly believed we were solid. But looking back, I realized the cracks had been forming for a while. Lisa started acting differently about a year ago. It was subtle at first. She began going out more often, claiming she needed me time, or that she was catching up with friends. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, everyone needs space, right? I was busy with work, and if she wanted a night out now and then, who was I to stop her? But then, the nights out became more frequent, and Lisa started dressing up more than usual. I noticed her pulling away emotionally too. She'd come home late and when I'd ask how her night was, her answers were vague, like she was hiding something. I wanted to believe it was all innocent, but my gut told me something was off. The real kicker came when Lisa sat me down one evening and out of the blue proposed an open marriage. I remember sitting there, stunned, trying to process her words. She spoke about exploring freedom and not being tied down, but I could hear the subtext loud and clear. This wasn't about exploration. This was about justifying something that had already started. I felt blindsided. Lisa and I had never even hinted at this kind of lifestyle before. We'd always been about commitment, trust, and working through things together. The idea that she wanted to open up our marriage just didn't sit right with me. It felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. I didn't agree to it right away. I needed time to think, to figure out what was really going on. But deep down I knew. Lisa wasn't asking for permission, she was covering her tracks. After Lisa dropped the bomb about the open marriage, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The woman I married wouldn't have suggested this out of nowhere. I tried to play it cool, acting like I was considering her idea, but inside I was a mess. I needed answers. So a few nights later, while Lisa was out on one of her me-time evenings, I decided to dig a little deeper. I wasn't proud of it, but I knew I had to check her phone. I'd never invaded her privacy before, but this time felt different. My instincts were screaming at me. I knew Lisa's passcode, something she never bothered to hide. My hands shook a little as I unlocked her phone and opened her messages. At first it was just mundane texts with her friends, stuff about dinner plans or gossip. But then I found a thread with someone named Evan. My heart dropped. I opened the chat and there it was. Explicit messages, plans for secret meetups and flirty exchanges that left no room for doubt. Lisa wasn't just thinking about opening up our marriage. She was already knee-deep in an affair. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling my world crumble around me. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied straight to my face while sneaking around with this guy? I felt anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness all at once. When Lisa got home that night, she had this casual smile like everything was normal. It made my blood boil. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed a plan, needed to process everything I just uncovered. So I played along, waiting for the right moment to confront her. Little did she know her facade was cracking, and I was ready to bring everything to light. The next day felt like a ticking time bomb. I could barely focus on anything, my mind stuck on the messages I had found. Every time I looked at Lisa, all I could see were the lies she had been feeding me. I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up much longer, I had to confront her. That evening, I waited until after dinner. Sophie was at a friend's house, so we had the place to ourselves. Lisa was scrolling through her phone on the couch, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. I walked over and stood in front of her, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. She looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up?" I sat down across from her, locking eyes. "I know about Evan." For a moment there was silence, just the sound of the clock ticking in the background. Lisa's face went pale, her eyes widening slightly. But instead of denying it or panicking, she leaned back, crossing her arms defensively. "What exactly do you know?" she asked, her tone cold. That response hit me like a punch to the gut. No remorse, no apology, just a challenge. I pulled out my phone and opened the pictures I'd taken of her messages with Evan, holding them up for her to see. I know everything, Lisa. The messages, the meetups, all of it. Lisa's eyes flicked to the phone, and she let out a sigh, almost like she was relieved the secret was out. Well, now you know, she said, shrugging. What do you want me to say, Eric? Her nonchalant attitude set me off. I want you to explain how you could betray me like this. How you could suggest an open marriage while you were already sleeping with someone else. Lisa scoffed, rolling her eyes. It's not a betrayal, Eric. I just wanted something different. We've been stuck in the same routine for years. I needed freedom. Freedom. I repeated, incredulous. And what about me? What about our marriage? Did that mean nothing to you? She shook her head, clearly frustrated. It's not about you, Eric. It's about me wanting more from life. You're the one making this a bigger deal than it is. Her words hit me like a slap, and I realized that the woman I thought I knew was gone. Lisa wasn't sorry for what she did. She wasn't interested in fixing our marriage. She just wanted to justify her actions. I stood up, my voice steady but cold. If freedom is what you want, Lisa, you can have it. I'm filing for divorce. Lisa's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, her expression unreadable. Fine. If that's what you want. I didn't reply. I walked out of the room, out of the life we'd built together, knowing that there was no turning back. Filing for divorce was easier than I thought it would be, at least on paper. Emotionally, though, it was like walking through a storm. Every memory, every shared moment with Lisa, now felt tainted. I thought I'd feel some relief after making the decision, but instead there was just a hollow ache. Lisa moved out within a week, leaving behind the house we had made our home. She packed up her things with the same cold efficiency she had shown during our confrontation. No tears, no second-guessing, just a few bags and a curt goodbye. I tried to focus on the logistics, dividing assets, canceling joint accounts, informing friends and family. It was easier to deal with the technical side of things than to sit with the reality that my marriage was over. Sophie, thankfully, was old enough to understand, but that didn't make it any less painful for her. One evening, after another day of sorting through the wreckage, Sophie came to sit beside me on the couch. She hadn't said much since Lisa left, keeping to herself as she processed everything in her own way. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "I'm getting there, Sophie. It's going to take time, but we'll be okay." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Did Mom ever explain why she did it? I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with more than she needed to know. She said she wanted something different, something more. But that's not an excuse for what she did. Sophie's brow furrowed. I don't understand how she could just throw everything away like that. Me neither, I admitted. But sometimes people make choices that hurt others because they're chasing something they think they need. Sophie was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "I'm glad you're not letting her get away with it, Dad." Her words gave me a small sense of comfort, a reminder that we were still a family, even if it was just the two of us now. "Thanks, sophomore. We're going to get through this together." She smiled faintly, and for the first time in days I felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope was short-lived because soon after, I got the first call that would drag us back into Lisa's chaos. It was late, and I had just sat down to watch TV when my phone buzzed. I frowned, seeing a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious. "Is this Eric?" A woman's voice asked, strained and urgent. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Detective Harris with the DEA. I'm calling about Lisa." My heart dropped. "What about her?" "She's been arrested in connection with a drug trafficking operation. We need you to come in to answer some questions." I sat there, stunned, the world tilting beneath me. Lisa's betrayal was bad enough, but now she was involved in something criminal? I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The drive to the DEA office felt surreal. I kept replaying the detective's words over and over in my mind. Lisa. Arrested. Drug trafficking. It was like a bad movie plot, except it was happening to me. I couldn't wrap my head around how Lisa, the woman I had once loved, had gotten involved in something so dangerous. When I arrived, I was ushered into a sterile room where Detective Harris, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, sat waiting. She gestured for me to sit, her expression serious. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Lewis," she said, getting straight to the point. "We need to ask you some questions about Lisa and her association with Evan Daniels." I nodded, still trying to process everything. "I'll help however I can, but I didn't know Lisa was involved in this." Detective Harris flipped through some papers in front of her. Lisa was arrested during a DEA sting operation targeting a drug trafficking ring. Evan Daniels is one of the key players. Based on what we've gathered, Lisa has been closely connected to him. I leaned forward, disbelief etched on my face. Lisa knew Evan from her affair, but drugs? She never mentioned anything like that. This is all news to me. "We understand that you recently filed for divorce," Harris said, glancing up. "Did you notice any unusual behavior before that?" I sighed, recounting the changes in Lisa's behavior. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden proposal for an open marriage. I knew she was cheating, but I didn't know it had escalated to this. Harris listened carefully, nodding. "Unfortunately, it seems she got in over her head with Evan. We've been building a case against him for months, and Lisa's involvement, whether voluntary or coerced, makes her a significant part of that case." I shook my head, the weight of it all settling in. "What happens now?" "Lisa will face charges, and if convicted she's looking at serious time," Harris said bluntly. "But we also want to make sure you and your daughter are safe. Evan's associates may not take kindly to Lisa's arrest." The idea of Sophie being in danger because of Lisa's choices sent a chill down my spine. "What do I need to do?" "For now, just stay alert. If you notice anything suspicious, contact us immediately," Harris advised. "We'll do what we can to protect you." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications. As I left the office, I felt like I was falling deeper into an abyss, one Lisa had dragged us into with her recklessness. But one thing was clear: I had to protect Sophie at all costs. When I got home, Sophie was waiting in the living room, her face filled with concern. "Dad, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat down beside her, taking her hands in mine. "There's something I need to tell you about Mom. It's complicated." And as I explained everything, I realized this was just the beginning of a long, dark road ahead. Telling Sophie about Lisa's arrest was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. She sat there, her eyes wide with disbelief as I explained what little I knew. The betrayal of Lisa's affair had already hurt her deeply, but this was something else entirely. "Mom's involved in drug trafficking?" Sophie's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. I nodded, squeezing her hands gently. "I know it's a lot to take in, but we need to stay strong. We'll get through this." Tears welled up in her eyes and she shook her head. "How could she do this to us? How could she get involved in something so dangerous?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the same bewilderment. "But we need to focus on keeping ourselves safe now." Sophie leaned into me and I held her tightly, wishing I could shield her from all of this. She was just a kid, caught in the crossfire of her mother's terrible choices. I promised myself right then that I'd do everything in my power to protect her. The next few days passed in a haze of worry and uncertainty. I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was around the corner. Lisa hadn't reached out since her arrest, and I didn't expect her to. But the silence only made my anxiety grow. Then one afternoon my phone buzzed again. This time it was Lisa. Seeing her name on the screen sent a jolt through me, but I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Eric," she said, her voice strained, desperate. "I need your help." I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tightly. "Help? After everything, you expect me to help you?" "Please," she pleaded. "Evan is dangerous, and I didn't know what I was getting into. They're going to use me to get to him, and I don't know what to do." Her words hit me like a wave, the weight of her fear pressing down on me. Despite everything she had done, part of me couldn't completely ignore her plea. But I also knew I had to be smart about this. "I'll talk to the DEA," I said, my voice cold. "But don't expect me to do more than that." Thank you, she whispered, sounding like she was on the verge of tears. I'm so sorry, Eric. I never wanted this to happen. I hung up without replying, my mind spinning. I had no intention of going out of my way for Lisa, but I knew I needed to inform Detective Harris about this new development. If Lisa was telling the truth about Evan's danger, it meant we were still in the thick of it. When I called Harris, she confirmed my fears. Lisa might be in over her head, but that doesn't change her involvement, she said. We'll use her to get to Evan, but you need to stay vigilant. This isn't over. The conversation left me feeling hollow, a mix of anger and resignation settling in my chest. Lisa had made her choices and now we were all paying the price. But no matter what, I was determined to keep Sophie and myself out of the wreckage as much as possible. After Lisa's desperate call, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling even further out of control. She was scared, and while part of me wanted to turn my back on her, I knew that wouldn't help Sophie or me in the long run. The stakes were getting higher and I had to stay a step ahead. The next morning I called Detective Harris again to update her on what Lisa had said about Evan. She listened carefully, her tone more serious than before. Eric, we've been monitoring Evan for a while. If Lisa is telling the truth, she's in more danger than she realizes. And by extension, so are you and Sophie, Harris explained. We'll increase surveillance around your home, but I need you to stay alert. Hearing those words only amplified the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. I thanked Harris and hung up, pacing the living room as I tried to think of the next move. Every instinct in me was screaming to protect Sophie, to keep her as far from this mess as possible. That afternoon I sat Sophie down again, keeping my voice calm even though my nerves were frayed. Sophie, I need you to understand something. Things might get intense for a while. The DEA is watching Evan closely and because of Mom's involvement we need to be careful. She looked at me, her eyes filled with worry but also determination. What do you mean by careful? Just be aware of your surroundings, I said gently. If you see anything unusual or if someone approaches you that you don't know, you tell me right away. We're safe, but we have to stay cautious. She nodded, absorbing every word. Okay, Dad. I'll be careful. I hated having to put that burden on her, but there was no other choice. Lisa's actions had dragged us into a dangerous world, and we had to navigate it as best we could. A few nights later, as I was locking up the house, my phone buzzed again. It was another unknown number. My gut twisted, but I answered. Mr. Lewis? A male voice asked, smooth but with a hint of menace. Yes, I replied, my voice tense. This is someone who knows Evan, the voice continued. We know about Lisa and we know she's been talking to the DEA. That's not a good look for her or for you. My heart pounded in my chest, every word sinking in like a stone. What do you want? Just a friendly warning, the man said, his tone almost mocking. Stay out of this or things could get messy. The call ended before I could respond, leaving me standing there, gripping the phone like a lifeline. I immediately called Detective Harris, relaying every word of the threat. This confirms what we feared, Harris said, her voice tense. We'll increase protection, but you need to stay vigilant. These people don't make idle threats. I hung up, my mind racing. Lisa's choices had put us directly in the crosshairs of something far more dangerous than I had imagined. But I wasn't about to let anyone threaten my daughter or me without a fight. As I double-checked the locks and peered out the window, I knew the next steps were crucial. We were on the brink, and one wrong move could change everything. The threat from Evan's associate rattled me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just words. It was a clear warning that we were now entangled in something far more dangerous. I spent the night pacing, checking the windows and doors, unable to shake the fear that someone could be watching. By morning, exhaustion had set in, but I knew I had to keep moving. Sophie needed to feel safe, even if I wasn't. Over breakfast, I did my best to act normal, though I could see the worry in her eyes. Dad, is everything okay? She asked, her voice tentative. I forced a smile, though it felt hollow. We're fine, sophomore. Just a lot going on with the situation, but I'm handling it. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. I didn't blame her. I wasn't convinced either. After Sophie left for school, I sat down to make another call to Detective Harris. She needed to know just how serious things were getting. When she picked up, her voice was brisk, but there was an edge of concern. "Mr. Lewis, I've already dispatched more officers to patrol your neighborhood," she said before I could even start. "We're doing everything we can to keep you and Sophie safe." "I appreciate that, Detective," I said, rubbing my temples. "But these people aren't going to back off easily. I need to know what more we can do." There was a pause, then Harris spoke, her tone softer. "The best thing you can do is stay vigilant and keep Sophie out of harm's way. We're closing in on Evan, but these operations take time." Time was something I wasn't sure we had. But I thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down harder than ever. As the day wore on, I tried to distract myself with work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the phone call from the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that at any moment, things could take a turn for the worse. That evening, as Sophie did her homework, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. A message popped up from an unknown number, and dread coiled in my stomach as I opened it. "We warned you. Stay out of this or we'll make sure you regret it." The message was clear and the threat was more direct than ever. My hands clenched around the phone, my mind racing. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to take action, but I also had to keep Sophie in the dark as much as possible. I called Harris again, my voice tight with frustration. "Detective, I just got another message. They're not backing down." She sighed, the weariness in her voice evident. "We're ramping up our efforts, Eric. But I need you to trust us. Don't engage with them. Let us handle this." "I'm trusting you," I said, though it felt like trust was a fragile thing in this moment. "But if anything happens to Sophie—" "Nothing will happen," Harris interrupted firmly. "We won't let it. Stay strong, Eric. We're almost there." As I hung up, I tried to take comfort in her words, but the fear gnawed at me. We were playing a dangerous game, and every move felt like a step closer to the edge. The next few days passed in a haze of fear and tension. I barely slept, constantly on edge, checking the locks, looking out the windows and watching over Sophie. She noticed, of course, but I did my best to keep her from knowing the full extent of the danger we were in. One night, as I was getting ready to lock up the house, Sophie approached me, her brow furrowed with concern. "Dad, are you sure we're safe? You've been acting different." I knelt down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm just being cautious, sophomore. There's a lot going on, but we're okay. I promise." She nodded, though the worry in her eyes lingered. "I trust you." Her words meant the world, but they also added to the pressure. I had to keep her safe no matter what. That night, as Sophie slept, I stayed up in the living room, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to happen. And then, around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding. "Hello." "You didn't listen," the voice on the other end said, cold and menacing. "Now you'll see what happens when people cross us." The line went dead before I could respond, but the message was clear. They weren't bluffing, and now they were making their move. I immediately called Detective Harris, my voice tight with urgency. "They just called again. They're planning something. I need help now." "Stay calm, Eric," she said, though her voice carried the same tension. "We've got officers nearby. I'm sending them over right away. Don't engage with anyone. Just stay inside and keep Sophie safe." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Okay." I hung up and locked all the doors and windows, checking everything twice. Then I stood in the hallway, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Every creak of the house made my heart race, every shadow seemed like a threat. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the silence stretching unbearably. Then, just as I was about to check the front door again, I heard a faint knock. My breath caught in my throat. I peered through the peephole, my hands shaking. Outside stood two men dressed in dark clothes, their faces partially hidden. They knocked again, harder this time. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't let them in, couldn't confront them, not without backup. I grabbed my phone and called Harris again. "They're here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Two men at the door." "Stay calm," Harris said. Officers are 2 minutes away. Don't open the door. Don't do anything. Just stay put. I clutched the phone tightly, my eyes never leaving the front door. The men outside knocked one more time, then, as if sensing something was off, they turned and disappeared into the night. Moments later, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Relief washed over me as I saw the flashing lights approaching. But the relief was short-lived. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning of something far worse. The police arrived within minutes, their lights casting eerie shadows across the front yard. Officers moved quickly, scanning the area, but the men who had knocked on my door were long gone. I opened the door to let them in, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline. Detective Harris arrived shortly after, her expression grim as she approached me. "Eric, are you and Sophie okay?" "We're fine," I said, though my voice was shaky. "They knocked, but they didn't get in. They took off when they heard the sirens." Harris nodded, glancing around. "They're testing you, trying to intimidate you into silence. But we're closing in on Evan and they know it." I rubbed my temples, the weight of the situation pressing harder than ever. This can't keep happening. "Sophie, she's scared and so am I." Harris placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice steady. "We're going to get them, Eric. But you need to stay strong. We're increasing the patrols around your house. You'll be safe." Safe. The word felt hollow in the face of everything that had happened. But I had no choice but to trust Harris and her team. They were all that stood between us and the people trying to hurt us. Once the officers cleared the area, I returned inside, locking the door behind me. Sophie was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide with fear. "Are they gone?" she asked, her voice small. I sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. "They're gone. The police are here now, and they'll keep us safe." Sophie buried her face in my chest, her body trembling. "I hate this, Dad. I hate that Mom got us into this mess." "I know," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I hate it too. But we're going to get through this. I promise." The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Sophie eventually fell asleep on the couch, and I stayed up watching over her, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't shake the feeling that the men would come back, that the threats would escalate. By morning I was running on fumes, but I knew I couldn't let up. I called Harris again, demanding an update. "We need to know what's happening, Detective. I can't keep living like this, and neither can Sophie." Harris's voice was calm but firm. "We're making progress, Eric. Evan's network is unraveling, and it's only a matter of time before we bring him and his associates down." Time. It always came back to time, something I felt we were running out of. But I thanked her, knowing I had no choice but to hold on a little longer. The day dragged on, filled with more tension and waiting. But by the evening we got a small glimmer of hope. Harris called again, this time with news that lifted a bit of the burden. "Eric, we've arrested several key members of Evan's crew," she said. "They're in custody and it's a major blow to their operations." Relief washed over me, though it was tempered with caution. "Does this mean we're safe?" "It's a big step forward," Harris admitted. "But we're not done yet. Stay vigilant, but know that we're getting closer." I hung up, finally feeling a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind us. For the first time in days I felt like we could breathe, even if just a little. The news of the arrests was a step in the right direction, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. Sophie sensed the shift too, though the tension in the house was still thick. That evening we had dinner together, trying to regain some normalcy. Sophie seemed quieter than usual, pushing her food around on her plate. "Dad," she finally said, breaking the silence, "do you think this is really almost over?" I looked at her, wanting so badly to give her the reassurance she needed. "I hope so, sophomore. The police are doing everything they can to make sure we're safe." She nodded, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. "I miss Mom, the way she used to be." Her words hit me hard. Despite everything Lisa had done, Sophie still loved her mother, still missed the person she used to be. It was a reminder that, no matter how angry I was, Sophie's pain was different, more complicated. "I know you do," I said gently. "And it's okay to feel that way. We'll get through this together." We finished dinner in relative silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. After Sophie went to bed, I sat in the living room, the events of the past weeks replaying in my mind. The arrests were a victory, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still walking a fine line between safety and danger. As I stared out the window, watching the shadows lengthen, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Harris. "Eric, I wanted to update you," she said, her tone cautious. "Evan's still at large, but with the arrests his resources are limited. We believe he's desperate, and that makes him dangerous." I swallowed hard, the relief from earlier fading quickly. "What do we do now?" "Stay on high alert," Harris advised. "We've got officers patrolling your neighborhood, but I need you to report anything unusual immediately." I thanked her and hung up, my heart sinking. The thought of Evan out there, desperate and dangerous, reignited the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not now, not until this was truly over. As the night wore on, I kept watch, every creak of the house making my pulse quicken. The storm wasn't over, and I knew we were still in the thick of it. But I also knew that we had come too far to back down now. The days following the arrests felt like walking on eggshells. Despite the progress, the looming threat of Evan kept me on edge. The thought of him out there, desperate and cornered, made it impossible to relax. Sophie picked up on my tension, and though I tried to shield her from most of it, she was too smart to miss the signs. One evening, as I was locking up the house, my phone buzzed again. I half expected it to be another update from Detective Harris, but when I saw the unknown number, my heart sank. I answered, bracing for the worst. "Mr. Lewis," the familiar, chilling voice of the man from before greeted me. "You think you're safe now? You're not. Evan isn't done yet." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "We want you to know that this isn't over until Evan says it's over," he sneered. "And he's not the kind of man to let things go quietly." The line went dead, leaving me standing there, the weight of the threat settling heavily on my shoulders. I immediately called Harris, my voice urgent. "They just called again. They're still out there and they're not done." Harris's voice was sharp. "We're closing in on Evan, but this means he's getting desperate. Stay inside, lock everything down, and we'll have officers at your house immediately." I hung up and rushed to check the locks again, the fear gripping me tighter than ever. I went to Sophie's room, gently waking her. "Sophie, we need to go to the safe room," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. She blinked up at me, confusion giving way to worry. "What's happening?" "Just a precaution," I reassured her, though my heart was pounding. "Come on, let's go." We moved quickly to the basement, where I had set up a small, secure area just in case. I locked the door behind us and sat with Sophie, holding her close as we waited for the police to arrive. Minutes felt like hours, the silence broken only by the faint sound of sirens in the distance. When the officers finally arrived, I got a call from Harris, letting me know it was safe to come out. "They're here," I told Sophie, helping her to her feet. "Let's go." We emerged from the basement to find several officers outside, their presence a temporary balm to the fear that had taken root. Harris was there too, her expression tense but reassuring. "Eric, we're going to stay here until Evan is caught," she said. "This is the final stretch, but we need you to stay vigilant." I nodded, exhaustion seeping into my bones. "Thank you, Detective." As the officers spread out around the property, I felt a flicker of hope that this ordeal was nearing its end. But deep down I knew the next few days would be the most critical, the final test of whether we would emerge from this nightmare unscathed. The night stretched on, with officers stationed around the house, their presence a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the shadows. Sophie clung to me, her fear evident, and I did my best to reassure her, though I wasn't sure how much comfort I could offer when I was just as terrified. As the hours passed, I tried to keep things as normal as possible for Sophie. We played card games, watched a movie on my laptop, and I even managed to get her to eat a little. But every sound outside made us both jump, our nerves frayed to the breaking point. Around midnight, Detective Harris called again. "Eric, we've got a lead on Evan's location. It's not far from you. We're moving in, but I need you to stay inside, stay quiet, and keep Sophie close." My heart pounded in my chest. "How close is he?" Close enough that we're taking no chances, Harris replied. But we've got him surrounded. This should end tonight. I hung up, relaying the information to Sophie as calmly as I could. The police are closing in on Evan. They're going to catch him. Her eyes widened, fear mingling with hope. Are we going to be okay? We will, I promised, though my voice trembled. We just have to stay strong a little longer. As we huddled together, I kept my phone close, waiting for the next update. The tension was unbearable, each passing minute dragging on like an eternity. Outside, the officers moved silently, their radios crackling with brief updates, but inside it was just Sophie and me waiting. Then suddenly there was a loud crash from outside, a window shattering, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Sophie screamed and I pulled her to the floor, covering her with my body. It's okay, I whispered fiercely. Stay down. The police have got this. The noise outside intensified, the chaos of the confrontation reaching its peak. I held Sophie tightly, every muscle in my body taut with fear. The sound of footsteps pounding around the house made my heart race, but I stayed still, knowing we couldn't move until the all-clear was given. After what felt like an eternity, the noise began to subside, replaced by the distant hum of sirens and the steady rhythm of heavy boots on the pavement. My phone buzzed again and I snatched it up, answering with shaky hands. Eric, it's over, Harris's voice came through, steady and reassuring. We've got Evan. He's in custody and the threat is neutralized. You're safe now. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, tears springing to my eyes as relief washed over me. Thank you, Detective. Thank you. I helped Sophie sit up, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. It's over, sophomore. They got him. She burst into tears, clinging to me as the weight of the past weeks finally lifted. We stayed there, holding each other, as the officers outside secured the scene and Harris came in to check on us. It's really over, Harris said, her smile tired but genuine. You and Sophie are safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed her. The nightmare was finally ending. The days following Evan's arrest were a blur of relief and exhaustion. The constant fear that had gripped Sophie and me for weeks finally loosened its hold, but the aftermath of everything we had been through was still heavy in the air. Detective Harris checked in regularly, ensuring we were safe and updating us on the progress of the case. Evan's capture had dismantled a significant part of his operation, and with him in custody, the threats against us had diminished. But while the danger had passed, the emotional scars were harder to heal. One afternoon, Harris stopped by the house to wrap up the last bits of the case. She sat with us in the living room, her demeanor professional but kind. Eric, Sophie, I want you both to know how strong you've been through all of this. It's not easy facing what you've faced, but you've come out on the other side. Thanks, Detective, I said, offering a tired smile. I just want things to get back to normal. Sophie nodded beside me. Yeah, normal sounds really good right now. Harris nodded, standing up. You're on your way there. If you need anything, you know how to reach me. And don't hesitate. As she left, I felt a sense of finality settle over the house. The chaos was behind us, but now came the challenge of rebuilding our lives, piece by piece. That evening, Sophie and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. For the first time in weeks, the air felt calm, the neighborhood quiet in a way that was comforting instead of ominous. Dad, Sophie said, her voice thoughtful, do you think Mom will ever come back? Her question caught me off guard, but I had been thinking about Lisa too. She was still in jail awaiting trial, and though she was out of our lives, she was still a part of Sophie's. I don't know, sophomore. I think she has a lot to work through before she can even think about coming back. Sophie sighed, resting her head on my shoulder. I hope she figures it out. But I'm glad we're okay now. Me too, I said, wrapping an arm around her. We've got each other, and that's what matters most. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were still legal battles to face, and the emotional wounds would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We had survived the storm, and now it was time to start rebuilding, stronger than before. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie and I slowly began to rebuild our lives. The house that had once felt like a prison of fear gradually became a place of comfort again. The constant presence of police patrols faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of our quiet neighborhood. Lisa's trial came and went, and she was sentenced to 25 years in prison for her involvement in Evan's criminal activities. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the woman she had become, but I knew that was her path to walk now, not ours. Sophie and I found a new rhythm. I took some time off work to focus on her, to make sure she felt secure and loved. We spent weekends hiking, watching movies, and just being together, finding joy in the small moments that had been so scarce during the ordeal. One day, as we were unpacking some old boxes, Sophie found a photo album. She sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, her eyes lighting up as she remembered happier times. "Look, Dad," she said, holding up a picture of us at a beach, smiling and carefree. "I want us to be like this again." I sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. "We will be, sophomore. We're getting there." Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but I knew I couldn't let the past define my future. Sophie was supportive, happy to see me smile more, and that was all the encouragement I needed. One evening, as we were preparing dinner, Sophie turned to me, her expression serious but hopeful. "Dad, do you think we'll ever feel completely normal again?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "I think we'll find a new kind of normal. We've been through a lot, but we've also grown stronger because of it." She smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that made my heart swell. "I like that. A new normal." As we sat down to eat, the weight of the past seemed a little lighter. The fear and pain had been real, but so was the strength we had found in each other. We were building a new life, and for the first time in a long time the future felt bright.